Now, I've always said that the fastest way to get to know somebody is to eat their food and to hear their stories. Now, it's a bit difficult for me to send to you my favourite Australian food, but I can definitely tell you about my favourite Australian stories from last year. Hi, I'm Leah, and welcome to Hide and Seek, and welcome to my 5 favourite Australian fiction books of 2017. And yes, I am still in my dispensary, and yes, I do need a holiday, and yes, I too hope that I will be filming somewhere else very, very soon. Now, the first 2 books I would like to talk to you about are rather an unconscious pair of books. The first, Sister Heart by Sally Morgan, a poignant, concise verse novel about the stolen generation. Now, the stolen generation is a dark time in Australia's history where young Aboriginal and mixed-race children were taken, stolen from their families and put into institutionalised care or adopted by a white family or simply treated as indentured slaves on large agricultural properties. This verse novel, told from the child's point of view, tells of the gut-wrenching feeling of being ripped from the loving arms of a family, the only family you knew and loved, placed into an institutional care facility that is dark and loveless and bleak and harsh. The sense of looking for family within that group and finding it amongst the other children taken. Finding that sense of kinship and family and belonging, and understanding the terrible generational effect this can have on people. Now, it sounds like a dark and depressing story, and I will admit I did sob like a baby. However, it was told in such a beautiful, innocent way as from the point of view as a child that I couldn't help but experience the sense of hope that the child did have throughout this story. I strongly urge anybody who is interested in experimental literature forms such as verse novel to consider giving Sister Heart a go. Now, the second book I'd like to talk to you about is perhaps the opposite side of that story, where Becoming Kirralie Lewis by Jane Harrison. Now, Jane is a Murrawarri woman from the north coast of Australia, and she tells the story of Kirralie Lewis, an Aboriginal girl adopted into a diverse and loving white Australian family, where mum and dad had a mixture of other adopted children as well as natural-born children as well. Kirralie grew up in a secure, loving, growth-filled childhood home where she did not really experience any overt racism, where she was encouraged to strive and achieve, so much so that her ultimate career goal was to become an international corporate lawyer because she dreamt that that was the pinnacle of success. Set in the 1980s, Kirralie goes off to university in Melbourne, and here we see her change and grow and experience, perhaps for the first time, overt racism, where she perhaps for the first time experiences the whole concept of social justice and what it means to Aboriginal people to have access and security and to become what they want to be. It was so fantastic. It was full of joy and hope and courage, and it was just delightful. Now, my only criticism of this is that the book is a young adult book, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I only mean that is in the fact that I wanted more. I wish this had been an adult literature story because I felt these themes were really important, especially that university discovery timeline, the social justice timeline. I would have loved to have known more about that. So ranking it against all other YA books I read in 2017, which wasn't a lot, I ranked this 5 out of 5 and definitely my favourite young adult book of 2017. However, ranking it against all the other books I read last year, I'm putting it at a 4 out of 5 stars, but still fantastic. The third book, also by a young woman, The Strays by Emily Bitto. Now, The Strays won the Stella Prize for Literature in 2015, which is Australia's prize for women's fiction. Fiction by female authors. And it tells of a bohemian story bohemian family in the 1930s in Melbourne. Think of I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, but perhaps a bit more grittier, perhaps a bit darker, and you get the experience of the Strays, an arty family and a girl from the outside who just looks lovingly on this eccentric family and weeds her way into becoming a member of that family, and then how it all comes crashing down. I loved the narrative of this story, the multiple points of view, and how it experienced the times changing in Melbourne between the wars ultimately and up to the start of the Second World War. The next book I'd like to talk to you about is Their Brilliant Careers by Ryan O'Neill, a collection of interlinked short stories about fictional, fantastical Australian writers. Now, I wish these writers and their books and the publications were real. Ryan O'Neill, in his irreverent way, has created this distilled essence of Australian literature over the last century, 2 centuries, into this hilarious book of these short stories. I borrowed this initially from the library, and this is still my library book, and I've ordered one to come in just for myself. It is playful, it is funny, it is irreverent, it is just a cracker. You can almost picture the archetypal Australian authors from the outback larrikin talking about the farm stories, but in this instance he's never even left the city, to the first woman's pioneer who was really just a little housewife and loved being little Miss Housewife at home and cooking and cleaning and being mother. However, she wrote the most fantastical feminist literature. The avant-garde in the 70s becoming a radical writer. It was just all the stereotypes, all the literary tropes taken to steroids in a cracking Australian laughter and a cracking Australian way. Now, the final book I'd like to talk to you about, Crimes of the Father by Thomas Keneally. Now, Tom Keneally is perhaps one of Australia's most widely known authors internationally, having won the Man Booker Prize for Schindler's Ark, filmed as Schindler's List for the world-famous Oscar-winning movie of the same name. He also wrote a number of other world-famous, well-received, critically acclaimed novels. Crimes of the Father is a historical fiction with 2 timelines, modern day and back to post-Vatican II, late 60s, early 70s in Sydney. Tells of the young priesthood and sexual misadventures, and it tells of good versus evil. Now, what I very much like about Tom Keneally is that he takes historical fiction, builds it on a foundation of research and knowledge and fact, tells the story in an almost detached, clinical way, and then puts the emotion over the top. So often you find historical fiction built on a foundation of the emotion and then putting a few random historical facts over the top to place it in a specific time period. Keneally does the opposite. He gives us the facts and the details and so much of the backstory that you can't help but feeling as though it is almost a non-fiction narrative. And I found it compelling and urgent, and the story was so clear in its not justification, but its explanation of how and why and who was involved of these sexual scandals of the priests that are still coming to light today. It is not an easy read in the fact that its subject matter can be a bit challenging. However, it is an ultimately hopeful read as it crosses many generations, crosses many good people, both secular and religious, and it creates the sense of good people exist everywhere and bad people exist everywhere, and you can't blanketly accuse one group of being good or evil. I really urge you to consider this book, especially if you've read Schindler's Ark or another of Keneally's work, but also if you are interested in modern Australia, as well as a reflection of post-Vatican II and the changes that the religious and social freedoms that that time period brought out. Now there is just a summary of 5 really compelling Australian stories that I read in 2017. I hope you find something here of interest. If I had to pick one that I would say, please just read it, it is great, I would pick Becoming Kirrily Lewis. It is a wonderful, wonderful Australian story and one I wish more people would read. But thank you for watching, and I promise one day soon a non-workplace video. But have a fabulous day.